As you take your first breath this morning, a startling realization settles in. Nothing will ever be the same. The air feels heavier, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice something you've always missed. You sit up, the sheets tangled around your legs, and for a moment the familiar contours of your room seem foreign, as if you're seeing them through someone else's eyes. The clock ticks, the light seeps through the curtains, but beneath the ordinary, a silent question pulses. What if everything you believe, every thought you think, is not truly your own? You swing your feet to the floor, feeling the coolness of the wood, and the question grows louder. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the voice in your head, the one that narrates your life, judges your choices, whispers your fears, might not be yours at all. Picture yourself opening your eyes to a world where every opinion you hold, every value you defend, every certainty you cling to, has been quietly shaped by forces you never chose, by hands you never saw. You find yourself standing at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. The act of thinking for yourself is not just rare, it is radical. You move through your morning routine, but everything feels off-kilter. The toothpaste tastes sharper, the water colder, the mirror's reflection more distant. You watch yourself, wondering, who am I, really, beneath the layers of inherited beliefs and borrowed dreams? How much of what I call me is simply a patchwork of other people's expectations, stitched together by years of silent compliance? The paradox gnaws at you. You have always believed yourself to be an individual, unique and self-determined, yet the more you look, the more you see the fingerprints of others on your mind. As you step outside, the world seems to hum with a strange energy. People hurry past, eyes fixed on screens, voices echoing the same headlines, the same outrage, the same tired jokes. You catch snippets of conversation, politics, celebrity scandals, the latest viral trend, and realize how easily ideas spread, how quickly they become dogma. You wonder, when was the last time I questioned the story I was told? When did I last pause to ask, is this true for me? The unsettling thought creeps in. Perhaps the greatest illusion of all is the belief that you are thinking for yourself. You recall moments from your past, childhood lessons, schoolyard rules, the unspoken codes of family and culture. You remember the first time you were told what to believe, what to fear, what to desire. The rules were clear, the boundaries invisible but absolute. To question was to risk exile, to doubt was to invite ridicule. So you learned to nod, to smile, to repeat the right answers. You learned that safety lies in agreement, that belonging requires surrender. But now, as the morning sun climbs higher, you feel the weight of those invisible chains. You ask yourself, what if the price of belonging is the loss of your own mind? A memory surfaces, an argument with a friend, a heated debate where you felt a flicker of doubt, a moment when you almost changed your mind, but you didn't. The fear of being wrong, of standing alone, was too great. You clung to your position, even as it rang hollow. How many times have you silenced your own questions to avoid conflict? How often have you swallowed your doubts, choosing comfort over truth? The contradiction is stark. You crave authenticity, yet you fear the loneliness it brings. You walk through the city, the noise and chaos swirling around you, and you see it everywhere. The pressure to conform, the subtle cues that shape behavior, the advertisements that tell you what to want, the news that tells you what to fear, the algorithms that feed you what you already believe. You realize that the world is a vast machine, designed to keep you thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same emotions, buying the same dreams. The machine is efficient, relentless, and almost invisible. You ask yourself, is it possible to escape, or is true independence just another illusion, a story we tell ourselves to feel special? A chill runs down your spine as you consider the possibility that your deepest convictions, your politics, your faith, your sense of right and wrong, might be nothing more than echoes of the crowd. You remember the times you felt certain, righteous, unshakable, but now certainty feels like a trap, a cage built from the bones of other people's ideas. You wonder, what if doubt is not a weakness, but a doorway? What if the only way to truly think for yourself is to risk everything, to let go of certainty, to embrace the unknown? You pause at a crosswalk, watching the light change from red to green, And the metaphor is not lost on you. How many times have you waited for permission to move, to act, to think? How often have you looked to others for validation, for the signal that it's safe to cross the boundaries of convention? The realization is both liberating and terrifying. The only permission you need is your own. As you continue walking, the city becomes a labyrinth of choices, each one shaped by invisible hands. You see the faces of strangers, each carrying their own burdens, their own silent questions. You wonder how many of them are awake, how many are sleepwalking through lives scripted by others. You feel a surge of empathy, a sense of kinship with all those who have ever dared to question, to rebel, to carve their own path. But you also feel the weight of isolation, the fear of standing alone against the tide. You remember stories of heretics and visionaries, of those who dared to think differently and paid the price. Socrates condemned for corrupting the youth, Galileo forced to recant his discoveries, Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. You realize that thinking for yourself has always been an act of defiance, a challenge to the status quo. It is not safe, not easy, not comfortable. It is a radical act, one that demands courage, resilience, and a willingness to be misunderstood. The paradox deepens. The world celebrates individuality, yet punishes those who truly embody it. We are told to be ourselves, but only within the narrow confines of what is acceptable. We are encouraged to think outside the box, but only if our ideas can be monetized, sanitized, packaged for mass consumption. The system rewards conformity, even as it pays lip service to creativity. You ask yourself, what does it mean to be truly free? Is freedom the absence of constraints, or the ability to choose which constraints you accept? You feel the tension in your chest, the pull between belonging and authenticity, between safety and truth. You realize that every choice you make, what to believe, whom to trust, how to live, is a battleground. The enemy is not out there, but within, the part of you that longs for approval, that fears rejection, that craves certainty. The battle is silent, invisible, but its stakes are nothing less than your soul. You reach a park, the noise of the city fading into birdsong and rustling leaves. You sit on a bench, watching the world go by, and the question returns, who am I really when I strip away the layers of conditioning, the masks I wear for others? What remains when I let go of borrowed beliefs, secondhand dreams? The answer is elusive, slippery, always just out of reach. But you sense that the search itself is the point, that the act of questioning, of doubting, of seeking, is what makes you truly alive. You close your eyes, feeling the sun on your face, and imagine a world where everyone thinks for themselves. A world where curiosity is valued over certainty, where questions are more important than answers, where difference is celebrated, not feared. You wonder, what would such a world look like? How would it feel to live in a society where conformity is not the default, where each person is free to explore, to create, to become? But then the doubts creep in. Is it even possible? Or is the desire for independence just another story, another illusion? Are we doomed to repeat the patterns of the past, to live out scripts written by others? The tension tightens, the paradox sharpens. You realize that the act of thinking for yourself is not a destination, but a journey, a constant struggle against the forces that seek to shape you. You open your eyes, the world coming back into focus, and you feel a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The path ahead is uncertain, the risks are real, but the alternative, the slow death of the self, the quiet surrender to the crowd, is unbearable. You know that the price of freedom is high, but the cost of conformity is higher. As you stand to leave, the question lingers. Will you dare to think for yourself, even when it means standing alone? Will you risk the comfort of certainty for the thrill of discovery? Will you choose the hard, lonely path of authenticity over the easy, crowded road of conformity? The choice is yours, and yours alone. But before you can answer, another question arises, deeper and more unsettling. Why is it so hard to think for yourself? What hidden forces keep you tethered to the herd, even when you long to break free? What ancient fears, what psychological traps, what philosophical illusions hold you back? The answers lie buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And so, as you walk back into the world, the great question echoes in your mind, demanding to be faced. What does it truly mean to think for yourself, and what are you willing to risk to find out? You carry the question with you, heavy as a stone in your pocket, as you move through the day. Why is it so hard to think for yourself? The world seems to conspire against it, but the conspiracy is subtle, almost invisible, a web spun from the inside out. You sense that the answer is not just out there, in the noise of society, but deep within, woven into the fabric of your own mind. You remember the first time you felt the urge to rebel, to question, to carve your own path. Maybe it was a childhood moment, a stubborn refusal to eat what everyone else was eating, a secret doubt about a story you were told, a flash of anger at an unfair rule. But the world responded quickly, decisively. A parent's stern look, a teacher's reprimand, the laughter of peers. The lesson was clear. To belong, you must bend. To survive, you must adapt. The wildness within you, the spark of independent thought, was quietly tamed. You wonder, is this taming a flaw or a feature? Is the urge to conform a weakness or a survival strategy? The question leads you down a dark corridor of the mind, where ancient fears and primal instincts lurk. You recall the words of Carl Jung, who spoke of the collective unconscious, the deep shared reservoir of symbols, fears, and desires that binds humanity together. You realize that the need to belong is not just social, but existential. To be cast out from the tribe was once a death sentence. The fear of isolation is etched into your DNA, a ghost from a time when survival depended on the group. But the group is not always wise. The crowd can be cruel, blind, unthinking. You remember Nietzsche's warning, madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. You feel the truth of it in your bones. The crowd offers safety, but at a price, the price of your own mind. To think for yourself is to risk exile, to stand naked before the world, stripped of the armor of consensus. You sense the tension between two forces, the longing for connection and the hunger for truth. The first pulls you toward the group, the second pushes you away. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called this the porcupine's dilemma. Porcupines huddle together for warmth, but their quills prick each other, forcing them apart. You crave the warmth of belonging, but the closer you get, the more you feel the sting of conformity. You are caught in a dance of approach and avoidance, forever seeking a balance that never quite arrives. You begin to see how this tension shapes your thoughts, your choices, your very sense of self. The psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But what if the self you are trying to change is itself a product of forces you do not control? What if your desires, your fears, your very identity have been shaped by a world that rewards obedience and punishes dissent? You think of Aldous Huxley's vision of a brave new world, where people are conditioned from birth to love their servitude, to crave the very things that keep them docile. You wonder, how much of your own conditioning is invisible to you? How many of your preferences, your dreams, your values are simply the residue of a lifetime of subtle training? The question is unsettling, almost unbearable. You want to believe in your own autonomy, your own agency. But the more you look, the more you see the strings. You recall Jean-Paul Sartre's insistence that existence precedes essence, that you are not born with a fixed identity, but must create yourself through your choices. The freedom is exhilarating, but also terrifying. If you are truly free, then you alone are responsible for your life. There is no one to blame, no script to follow, no authority to defer to. The weight of this freedom can be crushing. It is easier, so much easier, to let others decide for you, to follow the well-worn path, to silence the voice of doubt. You begin to see how the hidden problem is not just social, but psychological. The mind is a master of self-deception, a labyrinth of defense mechanisms and blind spots. You remember the concept of cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when your beliefs and actions are in conflict. The mind will do almost anything to resolve this tension, even if it means distorting reality, denying evidence, or clinging to comforting lies. You realize that the greatest obstacles to independent thought are not external, but internal. The enemy is not the world, but the part of you that longs for certainty, for simplicity, for the soothing balm of agreement. You think of the philosopher's cave, Plato's allegory of prisoners chained in darkness, mistaking shadows for reality. You wonder, how many shadows have you mistaken for truth? How many times have you accepted the world as it is, simply because it was easier than questioning, easier than facing the blinding light of the unknown? The cave is comfortable, familiar, safe, but it is also a prison. You feel the pull of the familiar, the seductive power of the known. The mind craves order, predictability, control. Uncertainty is a threat, a source of anxiety. You remember the words of the psychologist Erich Fromm, who wrote that the fear of freedom drives people to escape from autonomy, to seek refuge in authority, tradition, and conformity. You see this fear in yourself, in the moments when you hesitate to speak your truth, to follow your own path. You see it in others, in the desperate clinging to dogma, in the rage against those who dare to be different. You realize that the hidden problem is not just a matter of willpower or intelligence, but of courage. To think for yourself is to risk being wrong, to risk being alone, to risk being misunderstood. It is to step into the void, to face the abyss of uncertainty. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that comes from standing on the edge of possibility, with no guide but your own conscience. You begin to see how society exploits this fear, how it offers comfort in exchange for compliance. The rituals of daily life, the routines, the rules, the roles, are designed to soothe anxiety, to create the illusion of order. The media offers ready-made opinions, the marketplace offers ready-made identities, the culture offers ready-made dreams. You are invited to choose, but only from a menu of options that have already been approved. The freedom is real, but it is carefully managed, tightly controlled. You sense that the problem goes even deeper, into the very structure of language and thought. The words you use, the categories you rely on, the stories you tell yourself, all are shaped by a culture that values sameness over difference, certainty over doubt, obedience over rebellion. You remember the words of George Orwell, "If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." You wonder, how many of your thoughts are truly your own? And how many are simply echoes of the words you have been taught to use? You feel the weight of history, the long shadow of tradition. The past is always present, shaping the possibilities of the future. You think of the philosopher Michel Foucault, who wrote of regimes of truth, the systems of power that define what can be known, what can be said, what can be thought. You realize that to think for yourself is to challenge these regimes, to question the very foundations of reality. It is an act of rebellion, a declaration of independence. You begin to see how the hidden problem is not just individual, but collective. The forces that shape your mind are the same forces that shape society. The fear of difference, the longing for certainty, the need for belonging, these are the engines of conformity, the glue that holds the world together. To break free is to risk tearing the fabric of the social order, to invite chaos, to become a threat. You feel the enormity of the task, the scale of the challenge. To think for yourself is to swim against the current, to resist the gravitational pull of the crowd. It is to become a stranger in your own land, a wanderer in search of truth. The journey is lonely, perilous, uncertain, but you sense that it is also necessary, that the alternative is a slow death of the spirit, a life lived in the shadow of other people's dreams. You pause, the question burning brighter than ever. What hidden forces shape your mind, your choices, your very sense of self? How can you break free from the invisible chains of conformity, the silent tyranny of the crowd? The answers are not easy, not comfortable, not safe. But you sense that they are worth seeking, that the search itself is an act of courage, a declaration of freedom. The tension builds, the stakes grow higher. You sense that you are on the edge of a revelation, a breakthrough that will change everything. But first, you must face the consequences of the hidden problem, the ways in which it shapes your life, your world, your very reality. And so, you take a deep breath, steeling yourself for what comes next. The journey is far from over. The hardest truths are yet to be faced. You move through the world, carrying the weight of these hidden forces, and yet, on the surface, everything appears unchanged. The city hums with its usual rhythm. People laugh, argue, work, and dream. But beneath the ordinary, you sense a silent current, a force that shapes lives without ever being named. You begin to see the unseen consequences of a world where few dare to think for themselves. You notice it first in the small things. The way conversations circle endlessly around the same safe topics. The way opinions are traded like currency. The way laughter sometimes rings hollow, as if everyone is in on a joke they don't quite understand. You see it in the eyes of strangers, a flicker of uncertainty quickly masked by practiced confidence. You wonder, how many of us are simply repeating what we've heard, afraid to admit we don't know, terrified to stand out? You recall the words of Daniel Kahneman, who revealed how the mind is riddled with cognitive biases, shortcuts that help us survive, but often lead us astray. Confirmation bias, anchoring, groupthink. These invisible hands guide your thoughts, nudging you toward the familiar, the comfortable, the safe. You realize that your mind is not a fortress, but a porous membrane, absorbing the beliefs and fears of those around you. The more you look, the more you see how easily you are shaped by the crowd. You remember a time when you felt certain about politics, about morality, about the future. But now you see how certainty can be a trap, a way of shutting out the complexity of the world. You think of the neuroscientist David Eagleman, who described the brain as a team of rivals, a collection of competing voices, each vying for control. You realize that your own mind is a battleground, and that the loudest voice is not always the wisest. You begin to notice the consequences in your own life. The times you stayed silent when you should have spoken. The times you agreed to avoid conflict, even when your gut screamed in protest. The times you let others decide for you, because it was easier than facing the unknown. Each small surrender leaves a mark, a scar on the soul. Over time, the scars accumulate, and you begin to forget who you are. You see the same pattern in those around you. Friends who once dreamed of adventure now settle for routine. Colleagues who once questioned the rules now enforce them with zeal. Families who once celebrated difference now demand conformity. You realize that the price of belonging is often the loss of authenticity, that the comfort of the group can become a prison. You feel the urgency of escape, the need to break free from this unseen trap. But the trap is cunning, adaptive, relentless. It is built into the very structure of society, the way schools reward obedience, the way workplaces punish dissent, the way media amplifies outrage and drowns out nuance. You see how easily people are divided, how quickly they turn on those who dare to be different. The machinery of conformity is vast, efficient, and almost invisible. You think of the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who warned of the banality of evil, the way ordinary people can become complicit in horrors simply by following orders, by refusing to think for themselves. You wonder, how many injustices persist because good people remain silent, because the cost of dissent is too high? How many dreams die quietly, suffocated by the weight of expectation? You begin to see how the unseen consequences ripple outward, shaping not just individuals but entire societies. You notice how public discourse becomes polarized, how nuance is lost, how complexity is flattened into slogans and soundbites. You see how fear is weaponized, how difference is demonized, how the machinery of conformity grinds down the edges of the human spirit. You remember the words of Aldous Huxley, who warned that the greatest triumphs and tragedies of the mind are to be found in its capacity for self-deception. You realize that the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself, the stories that justify your inaction, the rationalizations that excuse your silence, the myths that make you feel safe. You see how easily you can become your own jailer, locking yourself into a life that is not truly yours. You feel the consequences in your body, a tightness in your chest, a heaviness in your limbs, a sense of restlessness that never quite goes away. You notice how anxiety creeps in when you try to break the pattern, how guilt whispers in your ear when you dare to question. You realize that the mind and body are not separate, that the price of conformity is paid in stress, in illness, in a slow erosion of vitality. You see the consequences in the world around you, a culture obsessed with image, with status, with the approval of strangers, a politics driven by outrage, by tribalism, by the need to belong, a marketplace that sells not just products but identities, dreams, and fears. You realize that the machinery of conformity is not just external but internalized, a voice in your head that tells you who to be, what to want, how to live. You think of the psychologist Solomon Asch, whose experiments showed how easily people will deny the evidence of their own senses to fit in with the group. You wonder, how many times have you ignored your own truth, simply because it was easier than standing alone? How many times have you betrayed yourself, one small compromise at a time? You feel the urgency building, the sense that something vital is at stake. You realize that the unseen consequences are not just personal, but existential. To live without thinking for yourself is to live half a life. To drift through the world as a shadow, a ghost. You sense that the true cost of conformity is the loss of meaning, the slow death of the soul. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the concentration camps, and wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You realize that the challenge is not just to survive, but to become fully alive, to reclaim your own mind, your own voice, your own destiny. You see how the unseen consequences shape the future, how each act of conformity ripples outward, creating a world that is smaller, colder, less free. You wonder what might be possible if more people dared to think for themselves, to question, to dream. You sense that the world is hungry for something more, for authenticity, for courage, for the wild, untamed energy of independent thought. You feel the urgency of the moment, the sense that time is running out. The machinery of conformity is growing stronger, more sophisticated, more seductive. The algorithms that shape your news, your friendships, your desires are becoming ever more precise, ever more invisible. You realize that the battle for your mind is not just a personal struggle, but a collective one, a fight for the future of humanity. You pause, the question burning in your mind. How do you escape this unseen trap? How do you reclaim your own mind, your own life, your own truth? The answers are not easy, not comfortable, not safe, but you sense that they are worth seeking, that the search itself is an act of rebellion, a declaration of freedom. You feel the tension building, the sense that you are on the edge of a breakthrough. The unseen consequences have been named. The trap has been revealed. Now the question becomes, how do you break free? What does it take to reclaim your own mind, to become truly independent, truly alive? You sense that the answer is not just a matter of willpower or intelligence, but of courage, a willingness to risk being wrong, to risk being alone, to risk being misunderstood. You realize that the path to freedom is not easy, not safe, not comfortable, but you sense that it is necessary, that the alternative is a life half-lived, a world half-awake. You stand at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. The unseen consequences have been revealed, the stakes have been named. The time has come to choose, to remain in the safety of the crowd, or to step into the unknown, to risk everything for the chance to become truly yourself. The choice is yours, and yours alone. The path ahead is uncertain, the risks are real, but the alternative, the slow death of the self, the quiet surrender to the crowd, is unbearable. You know that the price of freedom is high, but the cost of conformity is higher. And so you take a deep breath, steeling yourself for what comes next. The journey is far from over. The hardest truths are yet to be faced. The time has come to rebel, to break free, to reclaim your own mind. You stand at the threshold, the unseen machinery of conformity grinding behind you, the weight of inherited beliefs pressing at your back. The world you've known, safe, predictable, suffocating, beckons you to return, to forget, to surrender. But something in you resists, a spark, a question, a hunger for something more. You realize that the only way forward is rebellion, not the loud, violent kind, but a quiet, relentless revolution of the mind. You take your first step, and the ground feels uncertain, as if you're walking on ice that might crack at any moment. The voices of doubt rise up, old and familiar. Who do you think you are? What makes you so special? Why risk everything for a dream of freedom? But beneath the fear, another voice whispers, soft, insistent, unyielding. What if you don't? What if you spend your life living someone else's story, thinking someone else's thoughts, dying someone else's death? You remember the stories of those who broke free, heretics, visionaries, rebels. You think of Galileo, peering through his telescope, daring to see what others refused to see. You think of Rosa Parks refusing to move, her quiet defiance echoing through history. You think of Friedrich Nietzsche, who declared, "You must become who you are." Each of them faced ridicule, exile, even death. But each of them left a mark, a crack in the wall, a path for others to follow. You realize that rebellion begins not with grand gestures, but with small acts of courage. The courage to question, to doubt, to say, "I don't know." The courage to sit with uncertainty, to resist the urge for easy answers. The courage to listen to your own voice, even when it trembles, even when it stands alone. You see that the first act of rebellion is to reclaim your own attention, to notice when you are being swept along by the current, to pause, to ask, "Is this true for me?" You begin to practice this rebellion in the quiet moments of your day. You notice the stories you tell yourself, the ones about who you are, what you can do, what you deserve. You ask where these stories came from, whose voices echo in your mind. You begin to untangle the threads, to separate your own desires from the expectations of others. It is slow work, painstaking, sometimes painful, but with each question you feel a little freer, a little more alive. You realize that the rebellion is not just against the world, but against the parts of yourself that crave certainty, approval, belonging. You see how easily you slip into old patterns, how quickly you reach for the comfort of consensus. You learn to recognize the signs, the tightening in your chest, the urge to agree, the fear of standing out. You begin to welcome these moments, to see them as invitations to wake up, to choose differently. You remember the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." You realize that you cannot change the past, cannot erase the forces that shaped you, but you can choose how to respond, how to live, how to think. You see that rebellion is not about rejecting everything, but about choosing consciously, about saying yes or no from a place of awareness, not habit. You begin to seek out others who are on the same path, misfits, questioners, dreamers. You find them in books, in art, in fleeting conversations with strangers. You realize that you are not alone, that there is a secret tribe of those who refuse to sleepwalk through life. Their courage strengthens you. Their questions sharpen your own. You see that rebellion is contagious, that one act of honesty can spark a chain reaction, can light a fire in the darkness. You start to notice the ways the world tries to pull you back, the pressure to conform, the lure of certainty, the promise of safety. You see how the machinery of conformity adapts, how it co-opts the language of rebellion, turns it into a brand, a trend, a commodity. You realize that true rebellion cannot be bought or sold, cannot be packaged or marketed. It is a way of being, a stance toward the world, a refusal to be defined by anyone else's story. You remember the words of Carl Jung, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You realize that this privilege is not given, but earned through struggle, through doubt, through the willingness to stand alone. You see that the path of rebellion is not easy, not safe, not comfortable, but you sense that it is the only path worth walking, the only way to become fully alive. You begin to experiment with new ways of thinking, new ways of being. You question your assumptions, challenge your beliefs, play with ideas that once seemed dangerous or forbidden. You learn to hold contradictions, to live with ambiguity, to embrace the messiness of reality. You see that the world is not black and white, but a riot of color, a symphony of possibility. You realize that rebellion is not about being right, but about being real. It is about showing up as yourself, even when it's awkward, even when it's painful. It is about telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. It is about risking rejection, misunderstanding, failure. You see that the only way to find your own path is to walk it, step by uncertain step, trusting that the ground will rise to meet you. You begin to notice changes in yourself. You feel more alive, more awake, more present. You find yourself drawn to people and experiences that challenge you, that stretch you, that invite you to grow. You become less interested in fitting in, more interested in finding out what is true. You start to see the world with new eyes, not as a fixed reality, but as a field of possibility, a canvas waiting for your unique mark. You realize that rebellion is not a one-time act, but a lifelong practice. There will be days when you falter, when you slip back into old patterns, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear. But you learn to forgive yourself, to begin again, to keep choosing freedom over comfort, truth over certainty, authenticity over approval. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." You realize that this space is sacred, that it is the birthplace of rebellion, the crucible of transformation. You learn to cherish it, to protect it, to expand it with every conscious choice. You begin to see the ripple effects of your rebellion. You notice that your courage inspires others, that your questions open doors, that your honesty creates space for new possibilities. You realize that the greatest gift you can give the world is your own authenticity, your own willingness to think for yourself. You see that rebellion is not just about breaking free, but about lighting the way for others, about creating a world where difference is celebrated, where curiosity is valued, where freedom is real. You feel the power of this realization, the sense that you are part of something larger than yourself, a movement, a revolution, a quiet uprising of minds and hearts. You see that the world is hungry for this kind of rebellion, that beneath the surface, people are longing to wake up, to break free, to become who they truly are. You realize that the path of rebellion is not a straight line, but a spiral, a journey of forgetting and remembering, of losing yourself and finding yourself again. You learn to trust the process, to honor the struggle, to celebrate the small victories. You see that every act of courage, every moment of honesty, every question asked in the face of certainty is a step toward freedom. You remember the words of Nietzsche, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." You realize that your why is not given to you by the world, but discovered in the act of rebellion, in the search for truth, in the willingness to become who you are. You see that the path is yours alone, but that you walk it in the company of all those who have ever dared to think for themselves. You stand at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. The rebellion has begun, not with a shout but with a whisper, a question, a choice. You feel the power of your own mind, the thrill of your own freedom, the joy of your own becoming. The journey is far from over. The hardest truths are yet to be faced. But you sense that you are ready, that you have what it takes to keep going, to keep questioning, to keep becoming. And so you take another step, and another, and another, each one a declaration of independence, a refusal to be defined by anyone else's story. The rebellion is yours, and yours alone. The world will never be the same. You walk now with a new awareness, the world around you both familiar and utterly transformed. The rebellion has changed you, not just in the way you think, but in the way you see, the way you feel, the way you exist. The city's noise is no longer a blur. Every sound is distinct, every face a universe. The air itself seems charged with possibility, as if reality is waiting for you to notice its hidden depths. You sense that you are approaching something final, something ultimate, a truth that will not just answer your questions but dissolve them. You pause at the edge of a crowded square, watching the endless flow of people. Each person is a story, a mystery, a flicker of consciousness moving through the world. You wonder how many are awake, how many are dreaming, how many are trapped in cages they cannot see. You feel a surge of compassion, a longing to reach out, to shake them awake, to whisper the secret you have discovered. But you know that awakening cannot be forced, that each person must find their own way, must face their own darkness, must risk their own freedom. You remember the moments of doubt, the nights when fear pressed in, when the weight of uncertainty threatened to crush you. You remember the temptation to return to the safety of the crowd, to surrender your mind for the comfort of belonging. But you also remember the moments of clarity, the flashes of insight, the sudden sense of expansion when you dared to question, to doubt, to see with your own eyes. You realize now that these moments were not accidents, but invitations, signposts pointing you toward a deeper reality. You begin to sense the contours of this reality, the shape of the ultimate truth. It is not a fact to be learned, not a doctrine to be memorized, but a way of being, a stance toward the world. It is the realization that freedom is not given, but claimed, that meaning is not found, but created, that truth is not handed down from above, but discovered in the act of living, of questioning, of becoming. You see now that the journey was never about arriving at certainty, but about learning to live with uncertainty. The paradox that once haunted you, the tension between belonging and authenticity, between safety and truth, has not been resolved but embraced. You realize that to be fully alive is to stand in this tension, to hold the opposites, to dance on the edge of the unknown. You remember the words of Rainer Maria Rilke, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." You see that the ultimate truth is not an answer, but a question that opens, that expands, that invites you to grow. You realize that the act of thinking for yourself is not a destination, but a practice, a discipline, a way of being in the world. You feel the weight of this realization, the gravity of your own freedom. There is no one to blame, no one to save you, no one to tell you who you are. The responsibility is yours, and yours alone. You sense the terror of this freedom, but also its beauty. The beauty of a life lived on your own terms, a life shaped by your own choices, your own questions, your own truth. You look around and see the world anew. The machinery of conformity is still there, humming in the background, but it no longer holds the same power over you. You see the stories people tell themselves, the roles they play, the masks they wear. You feel compassion, not judgment, for you know how hard it is to break free, how seductive the comfort of certainty can be. You realize that the true rebel is not the one who fights the world, but the one who refuses to betray themselves. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl, echoing in your mind. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. You see now that this freedom is absolute, unbreakable, the bedrock of your existence. No one can take it from you unless you give it away. You begin to see the world as a mirror, reflecting your own mind, your own choices, your own fears and desires. You realize that every encounter, every challenge, every moment of doubt is an opportunity to practice freedom, to choose authenticity over conformity, truth over comfort, courage over fear. You see that the world changes as you change, that reality itself is shaped by your willingness to see, to question, to become. You feel the power of this realization, the sense that you are both the author and the protagonist of your own story. The scripts handed to you by family, culture, society are just that. Scripts, not destinies. You can rewrite them, discard them, invent new ones. You see that the act of thinking for yourself is the act of creating yourself, moment by moment, choice by choice. You remember the words of Nietzsche, "Become who you are." You realize that this is not a command, but an invitation, a call to adventure, a summons to the greatest journey of all. You see that the path is endless, that there is no final arrival, no ultimate answer, only the ongoing process of becoming, of unfolding, of awakening. You look back on your journey, the doubts, the fears, the moments of rebellion, and you see them now as necessary, even beautiful. Each struggle, each question, each act of courage was a step toward freedom, a step toward yourself. You realize that the pain of breaking free was the pain of birth, the labor of becoming real. You feel a deep sense of gratitude for the questions that would not let you rest, for the doubts that shattered your certainties, for the moments of loneliness that forced you to find your own way. You see now that the greatest gift you can give the world is your own authenticity, your own willingness to think for yourself, to live your own truth. You stand in the center of the square, the world swirling around you, and you feel a stillness at your core, a quiet confidence, a sense of belonging that does not depend on the approval of others. You realize that true belonging comes not from fitting in, but from standing out, from being fully yourself in a world that demands conformity. You remember the words of Joseph Campbell, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." You see that this privilege is not won by accident, but by effort, by struggle, by the willingness to risk everything for the sake of your own soul. You realize that the act of thinking for yourself is the act of claiming this privilege, of stepping into your own power, of becoming the hero of your own life. You look to the future, and you see a world of possibility, a world where more and more people dare to question, to doubt, to rebel. You imagine a society where curiosity is valued over certainty, where difference is celebrated, where freedom is real. You see that this world is not a utopia, not a fantasy, but a possibility, one that begins with you, here, now. You feel the urgency of this vision, the sense that the world is hungry for change, for awakening, for a new way of being. You realize that the greatest revolution is not political, not social, but personal. The revolution of the mind, the awakening of the soul. You see that every act of independent thought, every moment of authenticity, every refusal to conform is a spark, a seed, a promise of something greater. You stand at the edge of this new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. The journey is not over. It has only just begun. The world will try to pull you back, to lull you to sleep, to seduce you with comfort and certainty. But you know now that the only real safety lies in freedom, that the only real belonging comes from being true to yourself. You take a deep breath, feeling the air fill your lungs, the pulse of life in your veins. You know that the path ahead will not be easy, that you will face doubt, fear, loneliness, but you also know that you have what it takes, that the power to think for yourself, to choose your own way, to become who you are, is yours and yours alone. You walk forward into the unknown, into the light of your own becoming. The world is waiting, not for answers, but for questions, not for conformity, but for courage, not for certainty, but for the wild, untamed beauty of a mind set free. And as you move through the world, you leave a trail of possibility behind you. A whisper, a question, a spark. You become a beacon for others, a reminder that freedom is possible, that authenticity is worth the risk, that the act of thinking for yourself is the most radical act of all. The journey continues, the questions remain. But you are awake now, alive, unafraid. The world will never be the same.